when I don't trust my instincts and like sort of do things where I think like, oh, this is probably like what the CEO of a different PR firm will be doing. Like that's where I sort of like get hung up and mess up. So always, always, always trust my instinct.
This is Boss Ladies.
So I am here with Risa Heller, the CEO of Risa Heller Communications, which is a full-service communications and public affairs consultancy based in New York City. Risa is the former communications director for many big names in politics, including Senator Charles Schumer, and Risa is also listed as one of Crain's 40 Under 40. So Risa, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and sort of your career journey that led you to starting your own company?
Oh, yes. Okay, I would be happy to. So I grew up in suburban Detroit and went to the University of Michigan. And when I graduated, I had this, I majored in psychology and Hebrew and Jewish cultural studies, which I know is crazy. And when I graduated, I was like, oh, I'm going to go work at a Jewish nonprofit in Washington. Very niche ideal.
So PR was not in your mind yet?
No, I didn't even, I have to say, I know this sounds, I was pretty naive. I don't think I even knew what PR was. My mom had been a teacher, and my dad is a lawyer. And I grew up in suburban Detroit. I was pretty naive. And not to say that suburban Detroit doesn't have PR, as it turns out they do. It's just I wasn't aware of it. And I moved to Washington. I tried to get all these fellowships, which no one would hire me for. And I got an internship, kind of an internship at the Anti-Defamation League, which to me was like the ultimate. I was super excited about it. And I got it because my freshman year college roommate was on an airplane and sat next to the guy that ran the Washington office of the Anti-Defamation League, who also went to the University of Michigan. But he's like 20 years older than me. His name is Michael Lieberman. I really honestly owe my whole career to this guy. And she was like telling him oh, my roommate from college, this is all she wants to do. He was like, well, have her call me. I'll give her an internship. So that is how I got my first job.
That's incredible.
And I went and I interned for them, him and his colleague, Stacey Burdett. They ran this pretty, really active, smart policy shop in Washington. And they taught me, I would go to hearings on the Hill and take notes and bring them back, stuff like that. And then I got a job then 9/11 happened while I was working there. It was right when I graduated from college, a few months after I graduated from college. And I ended up getting a job. So they extended my internship a little. And then I got a job at Hadassah, which is this Jewish women's organization. And I was the low man on the totem pole in their policy shop. And same thing. I would run around to hearings. I would see Barney Frank on the Hill, eating ice cream and hearing, and it was so cool, and I was so excited about it. And also, I was completely not a Washington person and fully not cut out for Washington. I would go to I remember I would go to the gym and do the exercise machine and see everyone there would be watching the news and wearing a political t-shirt. But this was not really my world, and I would be what are these people doing? It was at the time, this is going to age me, I'm 41. At the time, there would be reruns of Beverly Hills 90210. But of course, that's what you would watch at the gym. I was just what are these people doing watching CNN? It just didn't make any sense to me. And so I got this job at Hadassah, and then they ran into financial trouble. They had some issue because of 9/11. They had lost a lot of their endowment, and they decided just to close the policy shop. So I was what am I going to do? I was crushed. I mean, truly, I remember sobbing.
Oh, no.
They laid us all off sobbing, just being this was my life dream. What am I going to do? And the woman who I worked for, who was a lobbyist for Hadassah, was I have a friend who runs a small PR firm. He's looking for someone. You should go talk to him. And I was okay. I'm not here in Washington to do PR. That's what I said. Also, I don't think I really understood how it worked. And I went and met with a guy. It was a 5-person PR firm. They did academics, nonprofit, and democratic politics. And he hired me to work for him. This guy named Steve Rabinowitz and this other guy named Matt Dorff. And they were really kind of smart, tough bosses. And I worked there for a couple of years. And then I got a job became the head of communications for Jane Harman, who was a congresswoman from LA, very tough boss. Who at the time was the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. And it was the time of intelligence reform. So it was like after 9/11, they realized like that the intelligence community was all kind of screwy and like none of the agencies spoke to each other. So there was a 9/11 commission, and then they had all this legislation to change the intelligence community. And she was the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. So it was like a big opportunity. It was a big opportunity for her. And so I worked for her. And then a friend of mine who I like met in Washington, again, I came from suburban Detroit, and this was not like, I didn't know, this was totally unfamiliar to me. So I had this friend who worked for Chuck Schumer, and he was like, we have this opening. Chuck needs an upstate press secretary. Like, you should come interview for this job. And I'm sort of like, no, I've got this great job with this very tough boss. I'm going to stick to what I'm doing. And my friend was like, you're insane. Like, this is a great job. Like, what don't you understand? Like, working for Chuck Schumer is a much better job than working for anyone on the House side. Like, you should come interview for this job. So over a period of many months, I had many, many interviews. And at the end of the process, he hired someone else, this guy, Eric Schultz, who's a very good friend of mine, who also is like a wonderful, fabulous comms guy. And at the end of the process, I had like been in graduate school at night. This story is too long. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. It's so interesting. I'm serious. I love this. Yeah, this is great.
So I had gone, when I was working, I was still working at the PR firm, I was like, I should get a graduate degree. So stupid. So I applied to like Johns Hopkins master's program in communications, thinking like, this will be great. I'll get a master's degree. To anyone listening to this podcast, please do not do what I did. It was incredibly stupid. So I went and I applied to Johns Hopkins. They had like, I've still never been to the Baltimore campus. Like, they had this like little building in DuPont Circle, and I would go to class. And so what happened was, when I didn't get the Chuck job, I was like, oh, this is good. I was like, this is good. I was finishing graduate school, and I had to write a thesis, like a big thesis. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I guess I'll just like write my thesis. I was going to leave Jane Harmon because it had been, and I was going to write my thesis for a couple months and get a new job. And I was like ready to do it. And like a few weeks later, the friend of mine in Chuck Schumer's office called me up and said, our New York City press secretary is leaving. Do you want to talk to us about doing that job? And me, still an idiot, I was like, oh, no. I'm writing my thesis for graduate school. I can't possibly become Chuck Schumer's press secretary. And which is so stupid. I kick myself every time I tell the story, because it's just incredibly dumb. And he was like, well, just come have like one more meeting with the senator. And like, because I think you'd really love this job. And Chuck was like, you are an idiot. Like, this would be the greatest job you could ever have. Like, what are you talking about when you think you're going to write your thesis? Like, no, you're going to come be my press secretary. This is the best job in politics. And I was like, okay. So we had another interview, blah, 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 blah. To make a very long story short, he hired me. The next day, he offered me the job. And then a week later, and I lived in Washington. He was like, you got to move to New York for this job. So I moved to New York a week later, and I became Chuck's press secretary and then his communications director. And it was the greatest job of all time. Very hard, very fun. And probably the most, I have a friend who worked for Chuck, and then became a state senator himself, and has had all these great jobs. And he recently said to me, it's kind of crazy that I myself have gotten elected to office, and yet working for Chuck is still the most career affirming thing I've ever done. So we all look at it, the greater diaspora of Schumerland sort of looks at that time and thinks like, wow, that was great. So I did that. And then after like 2.5 or 3 years, it's an exhausting job. Like he would do Sunday press conferences. So you work, literally all the time. I would go to Washington all the time. It was a very, very fun and super interesting job. And after a few years, I had moved to New York for this job from Michigan. I'd never lived here before. I did not know really we have this joke of the guy who I replaced, this guy named Stu, who was fabulous. I remember he had to like explain to me that there are 5 boroughs in New York City. Like, really, I did not. The first day we had a press conference at Penn Station. We were like leaving the office to go to this press conference, and like the light was changing like at the crosswalk. Mm-hmm. And I shot across the street, and this guy was like, why are you running across the street? This is New York City. No one is going to run over you here. And I was like, okay, really whatever. So I went And I did this job. And then after a few years, I was like, I'm exhausted. I had never done anything normal in New York because I just worked all the time. But I loved my job.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm going to leave. And I was going to go to this consulting firm and figure it out. So I did that. But after a few months, and this firm had been like the political advisors to Eliot Spitzer. So this was in 2000. Yeah. This was like must have been in like late 2007, I guess. Well, in early 2008, there was a big scandal, and Eliot Spitzer stepped down from being governor. And the lieutenant governor, this guy named David Paterson, was about to become governor. And he had called, I guess he knew these guys because he was on the ticket with Eliot and said, like, I need some advice. So we went up and tried to help him sort of like figure out all the stuff around becoming governor. Then he asked me to stay on and be his communications director. So then I was the governor's communications director for a very fraught time in Albany, although I would argue that right now it's a lot more fraught in Albany than our thing. And so I did that for 1 year to the day. And then I was like, by this time I'm like probably 29 years old, which I know doesn't sound very old, but if you've only worked the whole time and like not developed any life skills, as I had not, I had this goal of like learning to cook and roasting a chicken. This is what I wanted to do. I really wanted to learn how to roast a chicken.
I love that.
I just felt like it was like kind of like the ultimate thing to be able to learn how to do. So I was like, I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to go work in corporate America because like that will be something I've never done. And I'm going to learn how to roast a chicken. Which is like totally, yeah.
Amazing.
So yeah, of course. So I left this job, which was that job is a great job. It's a very intense job. And you learn a lot, Albany, blah, blah, blah. And I took, my first act was taking cooking classes. Like I didn't really know, I really did not know how to do, cooking was not, I really, really wanted to learn how to cook. So I went to the Institute for Culinary Education, like took all these cooking classes.
Wait, that's amazing.
And actually became like a pretty good cook. I mean, just like, like they were like recreational.
Yeah, but still.
But like, yeah. So I learned how to cook. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to get a job in corporate America. Like, of course. And I remember this was 2000, now we're at like 2009, but it's sort of the financial crisis. Mm-hmm. And there were all these jobs and everything just seemed like not that exciting. The thing about working in government is like government is so fun. Like you're doing a million things and you're always in the news. So like if you like a lot of action, it's super fun. If you like, there's a lot happening. So like the notion after I like started talking to some of these people at some of these companies, I was like, oh, like, so fundamentally like the comms function, I remember at American Express is like, you're selling credit cards. Okay, well, that, like everything seemed like, to me, a person who likes action, sort of dull. And like not probably like the highest and best use of like what I wanted to be doing. And a couple people were like, you should start a PR firm. To which I was like, I thought it was just the most hilarious suggestion. Like, of course, I could not start a PR firm. I didn't even really know how to like, a couple people told this to me, and I thought like, this is crazy. Like, of course, I cannot start a PR firm. Also, I'm from Michigan. And like, if you're from Michigan, you can't start a PR firm in New York City. And like, how would I even send an invoice? Like, what does that even look like? Really, whatever. And one person, this really a sort of PR legend, he was giving me advice, and I was like, what should I do? He was like, you should start a PR firm. I think it'd be great. He was like, I started my PR firm with like, and then named like two of the most famous people in all the land that were like his original clients. He's like, but you'll be great. And he was like really trying to be nice to me. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't possibly do this. And I'm sort of like trying to figure it out. I'm like practicing the cooking, doing a lot of like walking around New York, taking a lot of exercise classes, which was super fun. And this guy called me up, whose name was Carl Weisbrod. He ran the real estate arm, the nonprofit real estate arm of Trinity Church, which was a big landowner in New York at the time, the biggest. And they were looking for like a really aggressive comms person to help with a rezoning. And he called me up and he said, I heard you want to start a PR firm. Like, let's talk about this project. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, I'll talk to him about this. This will be fun. And then I'll get a job. So they interviewed me, everyone there interviewed me and blah, blah, blah. And they hired me to do their communications for this project, which was super fun and really, really interesting. But still I'm thinking like, I'll just like do a couple little things and like eventually I'll just go get a job. But I just never got the job. And like I would like get another client and get another client. And after a few years of like doing the company at my kitchen table, I like got a little office, and then I hired a person, and then I hired more people. And so we have focused on like doing really, really good work for folks. And it's been really fun. It's like this job is like the most interesting job I could have imagined. It's so fun.
That's such an incredible story, especially because one of my next questions was going to be, did you always know you wanted to get into PR? And it's like, clearly you just kind of, figured it out as you went, which I think is really, really cool. So it's so interesting because now like, it's not like that. Like, I talk to so many young people all the time, like people that work here with me, people that are trying to figure out what to do with their lives. And like these kids who are so fabulous, they're like, they're graduating from college and they know exactly what they want to do. And I just was totally clueless. I don't know if it was a different time or if I just was like the most clueless person, but I was totally, totally clueless. Well, I think
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's reassuring to some people who are listening who are probably still figuring out what they're trying to do. So I like this perspective.
Yes, I thought it was totally, I remember I originally thought, I remember when I was graduating from college, I was with my dad. My dad's a lawyer. I was with my dad somewhere, and I was like going to go to law school because I was just like, this is a thing that you do, And my dad was like, "Why are you going to law school? Or why do you?" I wasn't like that far down the road. Like, why do you think you're going to apply to law school? Yeah. I think I had taken the LSAT. I think, and I was like, I don't know. It seems interesting, and I don't know what else to do. And he was like, "Don't be a lawyer." And it's crazy because he loves being a lawyer. Like he is great at it. He loves being a lawyer. He's just turned 70 and he works all the time and he loves it. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Like, why are you saying that? He's like, you can do something better. Like, go figure it out and do something better. And I was like, okay. Like just being like, okay, like a kind of like a babe in the woods. And I didn't go to law school.
So what's a day in the life of Risa Heller like today? Like, what does your day-to-day look like?
It's very fun. Well, I have 3 kids. So in the morning, you might just be asking me about work, but I will tell you that the morning is a real Armageddon-like situation that involves a lot of breakfast preparation for my kids and a lot of yelling at them to get out of the door if they have school. So that's number one. Or yelling at a couple of them to get out of the door if they have school. But I would say it can be totally frenetic. At any given time, we do a lot of like we do some regular PR profile raising stuff, but we do a lot of crisis communication or like issues management. So things that like might be problems, could be problems, are problems, and things that are super complicated. Mm-hmm. So like on any given day, I will be talking to a ton of my clients about various things. There may be a hearing for a lawsuit. There are always reporters writing stories about various things that we're dealing with. So like it could be, and always, I have a million meetings, even if they're now on Zoom. It used to be much more fun and will be again. Mm-hmm. I sincerely hope when this pandemic ends. But like I spend a lot of time talking to my clients. I spend a lot of time talking to reporters on their behalf. I spend a lot of time thinking through various strategies for like to get from A to Z on what they want to be doing. One of the things that's interesting is like, any client that we work for has a complicated issue. And some of the issues, like someone is getting sued or they're suing someone, but every approach has to be different. The subject matter is totally different. The people are totally different. And so you have to really sort of like constantly be bringing like your full attention and like creative mind to what you're doing. There's like about a dozen people that work here, but they're not here in my office. They're now scattered in their homes. Mm-hmm. So I talk to them at various points throughout the day about what they're doing and how we're helping our clients. And we really, really, really try to we approach all the work like really earnestly. Like we really, really want to do the best possible job that we can do for folks. And it's interesting, like people kind of laugh when I say that, but I mean it. I'm so serious about it. Like, even though I guess by now I've sort of been around for a long time, we still are a tiny company. And, people can go and hire, a PR firm that has hundreds of employees or thousands of employees, but they choose to hire us. And so we want to, like, my big goal for everyone is just to be knocking it out of the park for them.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. How do you represent people whose beliefs don't necessarily align with yours, or whose actions
such a good question.
you don't condone?
Such a good question. This is what I would say. When you work one of the great things about working in government, although when I worked in government, I was sort of naive, is like, but this to hold up, is like you get to go work for a guy or gal who you totally believe in, right? Mm-hmm. So like, to me, in my mind, there's no more perfect elected official than Chuck Schumer. When he was named majority leader, when we won that second seat in Georgia, I cried tears.
I love that.
I was so happy for him. And it was just such a special moment. But like, that's not the way it works when you have a company.
Yeah.
And so we work for people that have all different kinds of issues. And, I look at all of these things and think like this, and I tell this to people who come work here. It's like, this is a non-ideological company. Like, we work on things that we don't love. We work on things that we do love. Mm-hmm. And like, we give them, both sets of them, the same amount of attention and care. And like, it's sort of interesting, especially when we do things that I don't necessarily agree with. Either things that like I don't necessarily agree with, or things that are like top subject matter wise, like something that I wouldn't at face value I would think like that's not interesting. And then we'll somehow be compelled to do it. Like, the things that I am worried about not being interesting become totally interesting to me. The things with the people that I'm not aligned with, I learn from it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I learn, it's a really interesting place because you get to work on so many different issues, so many different kinds of topics, et cetera, that like, you are able to sort of look at these things and learn about them. But again, we're not doing this because of, ideological, where we are ideologically. And people find themselves in like really complicated situations.
So do you approach each problem, like you see the problem and you're like, all right, let's go for it? Or do you ever have this moment where you're like, are you kidding me? Did you have to do that? Like, is that...
Oh, yes. Are you kidding me? Did you have to do that? It happens all the time. We try to give to our clients the very best advice that we can and take it very seriously. Do all of our clients want to take all of our advice? Absolutely not. We have clients that will tell them, here's how we think you should approach something. And they'll say, nah. And we'll say, okay. And again, same with the ideological point. We're not going to walk away from them just because they're not going to take our advice. We say to them, like, listen, this is the best advice. Like, if you want to get through this more quickly, if you want to solve this problem, like, here are the ways to do it. Mm-hmm. If you want to make this super complicated and make it last for a longer time, like, okay, well, you could do it this way, but it's just going to, it's going to make your life harder. And some of them say, I'm going to make everything harder, and we deal with it. But like, this work is so complicated, and particularly like all the public facing stuff, especially now, is so complicated that folks are really looking for like experienced hands who can help them like see around different corners. And it's tough, and they're looking for good advice. So, we say that when we say, oh, did you have to do that? We're totally upfront with our clients about like, did you have to do that?
Yeah.
when those things happen.
How do you keep your emotions balanced when I'm sure their emotions are, all over the place given what they're going through?
That is such a good question. Well, I would say this, which is when you work in government, and I always, like when I worked for Chuck or when I worked for the governor, like you're dealing with a lot of like really important things that like really matter to a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember when I worked for the governor, we were like doing the budget, and there was like all these, I would remember like being up in the middle of the night, like really worried, like, well, if we can't get this passed in the budget, this is what it's going to mean. And they were like problems that affected a lot of people. And so it gives you a lot of perspective when you then come to a client who's like made a mistake, but will be able to get through it. Or it gives you the ability to say to folks, like, I know this, like I say this a lot of time to our clients, like, I know this feels like a 10 to you. It's really more like a 5. And like, here's what will happen, or here's what a 10 feels like, because we've done plenty of 10. So like, there are 7 reporters calling about this right now. Like, there are times when 45 reporters are calling.
Wow.
So like, just try to understand that and think about that. And it doesn't mean that we like approach it with any like less seriousness of purpose or anything like that, but we try to basically bring a little perspective to it to say like, this is not going to be the end of the world, and here's why. And like, guess what? Most of these things are really not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And so we try to bring some like valuable experience to these, to all of our clients, to say like, here's how this is going to go, or here's how this is going to feel, or when you walk out of your apartment, there's going to be 20 cameras, or there's not, or whatever, whatever the thing is. And the experience, having done sort of every version of this, is super helpful to folks, because they can say like, okay, they always, yeah, and we always say like, this does feel like a 10 to you, so like, we get it, but like on the scope of, on the spectrum of where these things could be, here's really where you are.
So you've referenced your time working with, obviously, Chuck Schumer quite a bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and sort of what you learned and what you enjoyed from that?
Oh, of course. I mean, what I would say about that is like, I always tell this to folks, like, if you're interested in government, although I'm not sure that I necessarily was, but if you are, government is the best place possibly to learn. I worked in the House and the Senate in the governor's office. I've never worked in City Hall. But I will tell you that, like, it's, first of all, working in a legislative branch office versus an executive branch office is totally interesting and different. Seeing how working for a great legislator is just like an amazing thing to see, because, I mean, it gives you a lot of faith in government. Seeing how government can be good is like an incredibly cool and wonderful experience. Understanding how it can be like help people's lives and help like is amazing. I would say, just like from a skills perspective, I like, when you're a young person and you're hungry and ambitious and you want to learn, it's the best place to go, because government, you get to do the coolest things when you're 25 years old or 24 years old and 23 years old. Like, I remember when I would like sit in these hearings or go, when a boss would be questioning someone to be on the Supreme Court, like all these crazy august seeming things. Believe me, they are totally august. And to just like have a little, like the littlest window into it is so cool. But also, like, for people who are interested in this stuff, you get to have a front row seat to government. You get to meet the most interesting people from like places that you wouldn't even like,
Yeah.
I have friends from my time in Washington. I have a friend who I met, who's also from Michigan. She at the time worked for Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And someone was like, you guys should meet. You're both from Michigan. Like, okay. Anyway, she became a very, very dear friend of mine. This is years and years ago. I mean, probably when we were 24 years old, we met. I still talk to her all the time. She doesn't work in the Hill anymore. So you get to meet a ton of cool people, and you get to see like all these great things up close, and it is so cool.
So if you go to the gym now, do you watch CNN or still no?
Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Okay, number one, I don't go to the gym, but I want to. It's just now I have no time. But yes, of course. I mean, that's the thing that is such a good question. I now have like the loserist t-shirt, like the t-shirts that are like Democratic National Convention, Boston, which is so embarrassing. And of course, I'm like, I laugh at this. Like, if you could see in my office right now, of course, the news is on TV. Mm-hmm. It's constantly on. I read more news than anyone I know, and I wouldn't even contemplate going to the gym and watching something that's not news. But I always remember that feeling of being like, why aren't they watching Beverly Hills 90210?
That's so funny.
And then feeling like kind of silly about it. I know.
I love that. So yes, it's a great evolution.
Yes. Yes, okay. Exactly.
So what is up with this narrative that New York is dead? Because I grew up in New York City. New York is more alive than ever. Outdoor dining is amazing. People are everywhere. The city is popping. So tell us about the New York Forever campaign, and where did this idea come from, and how have you been fighting and helping to fix this New York narrative, or this narrative that New York is dead?
So New York Forever is a nonprofit that I co-founded with a bunch of with my friend Jonathan Rosen, and who also has a PR firm, and a couple other people who are great. And this was born out of like just around in March and April of last year, like right when the pandemic had started, there was just story after story in the newspaper that said, New York is dying. Everyone's moving to the Hudson Valley. The suburbs of New Jersey are so fabulous. And it was making me just insane, like absolutely insane. I was crawling out of my skin. I was also crawling out of my skin because I was losing my mind about the pandemic. But I was just like, this cannot be the narrative about New York. And Jonathan, who's a competitor of mine, but also a really, really close friend, we talk all the time anyways, and we would just be fetching on the phone about this. And I was like, we have got to do something. Or originally I was like, someone's got to do something. Who's going to do something? And then I was like, okay, I guess we're going to do something. And so we came up with this idea for New York Forever, which first we were like, okay, we should start a civic group. What will it? We spent a lot of time kind of like iterating around, like, what will it do? What will it do? And so we came up with this idea that New York Forever would do two things. One, it would cheerlead for New York City because no one was doing it. It was making us nuts. But sort of more importantly, we were like, yes, we could do a group just to cheerlead for New York, but it's not, we need to put some grist behind it. What could the grist be? And so after like talking to a lot of people and contemplating it ourselves, we came up with this idea that our goal should just be to get New Yorkers engaged, like as many New Yorkers as possible engaged in New York's recovery. And so that is what New York Forever does. It launched just a little under 2 months ago. We have a bunch of civic partnerships. So we're partnered with ROAR, which is the Restaurant Workers Relief Fund, which we're raising money for. We're partnered with the Citizens Committee for New York City. We're partners with New York Cares. And what we're trying to do is drive people to do a number of things. So volunteer. We're getting people to raise or to give money to different organizations and to generally feel like a real sense of like pride and ownership over the city. So we created a t-shirt with this brand, Alex Mill, to raise money for ROAR. And like, that was a very cool thing because they sold out in 4 hours and we were
that's awesome.
Totally cool. And super exciting. Yeah. And they're very cool t-shirts. They are going to be restocked. So everyone should buy one.
Good to know.
Yes, totally. So we did that. We started with that. We have some activations coming up that are a couple different fashion collaborations, a couple of other fun things to help support restaurants. We're looking into other kinds of partnerships with groups like iMentor, and we're trying to do everything we can to get people to feel like instead of like complaining about whatever they want to complain about, the garbage on the street or X, Y, or Z, to feel like, okay, I have a hand in this place, like I can do something to help. And that is really the goal of New York Forever.
I love that. And actually, my older brother is super passionate about ending this narrative that New York is dead. That's like his thing. Oh. He's just like, yeah.
Tell him to call me.
I honestly will. He's like obsessed with it. It's his whole thing. He was like calling us because we were away in the summertime. I was with my family and my brother was in New York and he was calling us and he's like, New York is amazing right now. Like, why are you not here? And we were all like, no, everyone says it's kind of like dead. And he was like so frustrated about it. So yeah.
We went out to dinner on Saturday night. Yeah, Saturday night we went out to dinner. It was sort of warmish, but I've eaten out so many times in the freezing cold. Like I can't even, like we have Long Johns. And
you're like bundled up. Like this is fun.
Yes, exactly. Like, yeah. And I mean, we ate in the West Village, but I live in Brooklyn, but we went out for dinner in the West Village. And I was just like, New York is, it was humming. Yeah. I mean, people were out. People were, like dressed. They were ready to go. So I think New York's like, people who are predicting New York's demise are just going to be totally wrong.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love the work you're doing. And let me know if you need an ambassador between me and my brother. We'll take it. We need help, but it's great. And people are I think one of the things that we realize is like people are super enthusiastic about this stuff. And like they haven't had an opportunity like for a long time. I think now it's changing a little bit, but like there was no one saying this stuff and people, they needed a way to support the city. So there's just been a huge amount of enthusiasm for it, which is great. That's awesome.
We're very excited about that.
So now obviously you have your own company and you're able to get involved with things like New York Forever, et cetera. What advice do you have for others, who are interested in starting their own company, who have their own companies? Like what have you learned being the CEO and founder of a company?
This is the thing that I have learned that has been the most useful is to trust my instincts. Like there was a lot that there have been a million times over the past 10 plus years where I've like, like I built this company, it's been successful, which has been great, but there's been a million times where I'm like, well, I don't have a formal business education. So like, maybe this isn't the right way of like looking at my numbers, or I don't know, like people that I've hired where I felt like this person doesn't fit into this role exactly, but I really like them and have a good feeling about them. Or like, those are the times when I have been super successful. It is when I don't trust my instincts and like sort of do things where I think like, oh, this is probably like what the CEO of a different PR firm will be doing. Like, I should do things more like that person. That's where I sort of like get hung up and mess up. So always, always, always trust my instincts, which is not like an easy thing to tell yourself. And like, especially when you sort of feel like, you're like, I always say with regards to what I do is like, I'm good at the work. I'm not that interested in like scaling a company or running the business or whatever, even though I have to do it. So I do it. But like the work is what I'm interested in. Yeah. But like trusting my instincts has been a big lesson to me in that.
Amazing. And my last question for you is, what do you feel is one of your greatest accomplishments?
Oh, I would say, what is one of my greatest accomplishments? I would say a combination of my greatest professional accomplishment is for just the existence, I think, of this company, and my greatest personal accomplishment is my kids, for sure. Who, by the way, read the newspaper.
I love that. That's great.
Maybe that my oldest daughter reads the newspaper. That feels like a big accomplishment.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being on Boss Ladies today.
Thank you for having me. So thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Boss Ladies. Check back next week for a new episode. Visit us at www.bossladiespodcast.com for more information about the show, or follow us at Boss Ladies Podcast on Instagram. Rate, like, and follow the show on all of your favorite podcast platforms.